welcome to Church in the Wild. Thanks so much for choosing to join us today. I promise you there is a purpose to me stacking my clothes on the stage here. By the way, Sebastian, this was Sebastian's first time playing, so let's give it up for Sebastian. He just left One Direction last week and came here, and that joke shows how old I am. I don't know any boy bands now, so One Direction is going to have to be, bud. That was the youngest one I could think of. Great job, dude. Let's give it up again for Sebastian. He's not Cam. He just looks like Cam. So these two together look like the Bobbsey twins. So, hey, I'm Jason. I get to be one of the pastors here, and I'm super excited for today to just kind of unpack this idea of hope. Hope is just this very, very powerful concept. And I'm excited to unpack it today with you. We are in the middle of a sermon series called Silent Night, and we're talking about what silence can bring into our life. And silence here in America can seem almost intimidating, and it can almost seem wrong, right? As we go into the Christmas season, we all should agree that Nat King Cole singing and telling us how it's the most wonderful time of the year is a good thing. We're all for the parties and the marshmallows for toasting, and we're for all of the stuff that goes with the Christmas season. My daughter and I took her last night to go do some shopping for Sam. And we went to Easton, and we drove around for a good hour, and then we found a parking spot, and it was a madhouse there. And I realized something. There's a couple things that happened while I was there. Number one, I didn't know that there was a Tecovas store in Easton. If you don't know what Tecovas is, that's because you're in the same financial bracket as me. Tecovas is like the Jordans of cowboy boots, apparently. And so I knew nothing about this, and I just saw it. And randomly in Easton Mall, there was like a dozen cowboys. And I was very confused on how and why there was a dozen cowboys in Easton Mall. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go see what's going on. And so we went into this Tecovas store. And I think the cheapest boot I found was $345, something like that. And it was like, a rattlesnake or something, like someone had shot a rattlesnake and turned it into a pair of boots or some deal like that. And I was like, whoa, we're in the wrong store, but they got cowboy hats, so I'm going to go check out a cowboy hat. So I put on what I thought was the coolest cowboy hat. I was like, man, I am cool. Like, I look really cool right now. Glenn Miller, you got nothing on me, Matthew McConaughey. And so I put this hat on, and I showed my daughter, and I said, do I look like John Wayne? And she said, no, you look ridiculous. So I'm not shopping at Tecovas anymore because I can't afford it and because I look ridiculous in it. It is the most wonderful time of the year. It's also a season in which it's like go, 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 right? We have all of the things happening. Everything seems to happen at once right now. And it will be a mad blitz for the next 10 days for all of us. And it will go faster and faster and faster and faster until Christmas Eve, when we're all watching these kids on the stage, and then we're all holding candles and we're singing Silent Night. And all of a sudden, in the middle of Silent Night, every year, I feel like, I catch my breath, and I feel this concept of hope. Christmas Eve really, for me, brings a ton of hope. You think about the way we do our services. It's the one service of the year where we put our kids front and center. We stick them on the stage. We have them sing, and we have all of these different things. And I feel this hope. We have teens who are part of the service this year. They're passing out things. They're doing different things. And you get this sense of like, man, the next generation is serving in a church. They're serving in a church. And you get this sense of the kids and the future. And even the nursery on Christmas Eve brings hope. And we take a moment in the middle of this song, Silent Night, and we're just holding candles. And it seems like, for me at least, that basically from Halloween till Christmas Eve, it is like a mad rush And for me, when I get to the silent night part of the service and we're all holding candles and I can watch you and your family, because it's like one of my favorite things to do is just look at you and your family as you worship together, and I see, the candles being held, I just get this sense of hope. And that's what Christmas brings. Like, that's kind of the point of Christmas Eve. Everything about Christmas Eve is hope. Even children waiting for the next day have this sense of hope because they don't know what they're going to get, but they're convinced it's going to be awesome. And we as adults, we don't know how our kids are going to respond, but we just know that we love them and we're so excited for them to tear into things. Christmas season is a season of hope. It really, really is the most wonderful and the most hopeful time of year. It's the end of a year. As we close the year out with a holiday, we just kind of look forward to next year is going to be awesome. Next year is going to be incredible. This year for New Year's, my brother, he's quite a guy, he's encouraged me to film a video of myself leaping into a lake. We're going to cut a hole in it, and then we're going to jump into it for New Year's. And it's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. And he also wants me to go survival camping with him. That's how he wants to celebrate New Year's. And I was like, buddy, I like to kiss my wife and make resolutions, not camp in the woods with you, right? It's this end of the year, beginning of a new year holiday season where we just find so much hope. And for me, at least, the moment that I experience it the most is when there's no music. It's just us together in silence, holding candles, singing Silent Night. And I just get to, for a moment, catch my breath and say, okay, the season is about you and all that you're going to do for us. It has to be how Zechariah and Elizabeth felt. We've got a couple verses today. Isaiah chapter 8, verse 16. Bind up the testimony. Seal the teaching among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord have given me are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts, who dwells on Mount Zion. There's this little word in there, and it's the word hope. And as we'll walk through this, we'll see just how important that word is. But let's look at Luke chapter 1, verse 5. Luke chapter 1, verse 5. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a prince named Zechariah of the division of Abijah. He had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. I'm going to spoil some of my sermon right now because I want you to really hear this a couple of times. Zechariah's name means God remembers, and Elizabeth's name means God promised. So literally together, their name means God remembers his promises. And they were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. But they had no child, because Elizabeth was barren. Both were advanced in years. Now, while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot to enter into the temple of the Lord and to burn incense. The whole multitude of people were praying outside at the hour of incense, and there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. And Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth." This is such an important part of the Christmas story. For 400 years, armies were marching, poets were writing, kings were fighting, and empires were forging. Yet for God's people, the only thing they heard from their prophets was silence. Several times they had leaders who took things into their own hands, but this only led to loss, to slavery, and to even more silence. It is in this silence that we see Zechariah, God remembers, faithfully serving in the temple with his wife Elizabeth, God's promise. The two faithfully serve God together even while their nation is in shambles and others have abandoned the faith. And God rewards the faithfulness of Zechariah and Elizabeth with a promise of a child for them and of hope for all mankind. Jesus is coming, he says. Hope is coming. Their son will go before him, preparing the way for the way. And it is in this moment that we begin to see this idea of hope. It is in this moment that silence begins to bring in hope and God begins to speak for the first time in 400 years. There's been 400 years of absolute silence. And then suddenly God appears and begins to speak. And he promises that he does remember his promises and that hope is on its way. I think in my life, often, it's hard for me to hear God because I think that he's silent, but in reality, I'm so busy, I'm so distracted, I'm talking to everyone else besides him, I'm listening to other people besides him, or as the children of Israel had been experiencing, they were determined to just solve the problem on their own. So shortly before this, there's this revolt where Jerusalem is under a massive attack because they've got leaders who are saying, you know what, we're not going to wait for God to bring us hope anymore. We're just going to go ahead and fight these people. And they're trying to solve this problem on their own. They're trying to bring hope to themselves. And all of a sudden, an angel appears and offers hope. Hope is kind of an odd word. It's kind of like a really misunderstood word here in America. And this is because if you've watched recently the Nate Bargatze Saturday Night Live sketch where he talks about the American language and how we use words, you understand how hope can get the bad rep that it gets because we just lump everything together here in America, but in Scripture, they didn't do that. So hope in America is kind of like a synonym with optimism. It's just kind of like, well, I hope that this happens, which is kind of like seeing the silver lining behind the cloud or just trying to see the best in everything. But if we're honest, sometimes optimists, they see the best in every circumstance, and hope is not always seeing the best in every circumstance. Sometimes hope is just seeing the circumstance for exactly what it is, and yet trusting that God will somehow come through for us. So we often don't really love the word hope because we've heard some optimists say something to us. I remember when I had COVID, and it was like the height of the pandemic, and I had it, and everyone was offering me, a lot of advice on what I should do, and this one optimist very lovingly, very encouragingly said, well, at least you get a good break to focus on your health. And I was like, yeah, I can't breathe, and I think I'm going to die right now, but thank you. I appreciate that. That's not the same thing as hope. That's optimism. When my Jeep, I blew the transmission in my Jeep 2 years ago, and the place up the road here was like, it's either going to cost you $7,800 or $4,500, or you just got to get rid of your Jeep. And someone who is very kind and a very real optimistic was like, at least God gave you $100 last week. I'm like, yes, at least he did. Thank you for pointing that out. Now I need to find 7,700 more, right? It's not the same word for hope as the word for optimism. Optimism is seeing the best in every circumstance, and optimism is important and it's good. But hope is a different word. Hope is an entirely different word. When we think of hope, some would say it must be wishful thinking. Others would say that it's just pointless. Others would say it's everything. We don't really understand it. And so I'm going to do my best to explain this to you today. Biblically, hope has 3 different meanings and 3 different definitions. So the first word for the idea of hope is the word yakal. Yakal. Yakal means to wait. It means to wait like Noah did in the ark. It's to wait in a situation and just have this hopeful expectation that somehow God will come through. So Noah sits in an ark and he's waiting, but he's also releasing birds to go find dry land. That is an act of hope. Okay, so as he's releasing birds, he's showing that he's hoping that God will remember his promises and that the waters will recede and that God will do what God said he would do. And this is how most of us think of hope. Most of us think of hope like a child on Christmas Eve, hoping that the things on our wish list got answered, and we have this waiting, this expectation that God will come through with really good blessings. And that is a piece of hope, but that's not the entirety of hope. So I've asked a couple guys to come show us the second definition of hope. The second definition of hope is the word kavah. It is kavah. And it is to wait under extreme tension. Okay? So we got Cam and Sebastian, and they're going to show us what the Hebrew authors meant when they would say that they hope in God. David would write in Psalms, "My hope is in God." We sing the Crowder song, "All my hope is in Jesus." And what that word means is these guys are going to stretch this rope as tight as they can pull it. Okay? This is the idea of the word hope. It's this right here. It is being stretched so tight and in so much tension, with so much force pulling you in every direction that you feel like you're going to be torn apart and you don't know how much longer you can hold on, and yet you just believe that God will still do what he says he will do. It's to wait under extreme tension like a cord that is stretched tight. You guys pull tighter? Pull tighter. So as they pull tighter, the tension increases. And here's what's happening in some of our lives. Some of us right now are sitting with hopeful expectation that the end of this year is going to be beautiful and the beginning of next year is going to be wonderful, and God is going to give us everything on our New Year's wish list and our Christmas wish list, and it's all going to go up wonderful. And then others of us in this same exact room feel like we're stretched so tight that we cannot possibly be stretched anymore. And yet both of us can have biblical hope. You see, it's not blind optimism. It's not just saying like, well, I think God's just going to make the sunshine for the rest of the year. It's like, hey, it's raining and it's December and it's Ohio and I got holes in my shoes, and yet I still believe that God will do what God says he will do because I have kavah. So David in Psalms would say, hey, I yakal in God, and then I also kavah in God. And he's saying both times, I hope in God. But in one situation, he's saying, when I go to church, God's going to bless and he's going to come through. And in the exact next verse, he's saying, I feel so stretched and I feel so tight and I feel so anxious and I feel so fearful, and I just hope I can survive. And this is the idea of the Old Testament word for hope. It is to wait for God. Like Zechariah and Elizabeth waited to say, well, we haven't had children yet, and we're 80, and it seems like that might be an impossible situation. But if God wants to deliver us, he will. And our nation is run by a corrupt king. And I work in a temple where the religious leaders are corrupt. And the ruler over us is Nero, or is an emperor, a Roman emperor. And they are some of the most vile, heathenistic people on the planet. And yet, if God wants to deliver us, he will. Good job. Good job. Thanks, guys. Give them a round of applause. That was great. We need to understand what Zechariah and Elizabeth were going through. Their movie Gladiator and Gladiator 2 try to do a picture of showing us just how evil Roman emperors were, and yet they don't scratch the surface. Marcus Aurelius, who was a Stoic and who was quoted as one of the most wise, peaceful men, was a Roman emperor, and he was responsible for killing more Christians than almost any other Roman emperor. Caligula was so insane that he placed a donkey at the head of his council. Nero burned half of a city down because he didn't like the smell of stables and then blamed Christians and slaughtered them. And the Roman emperors were the rulers when Zechariah and Elizabeth were told, hey, you're going to have a son and he's going to deliver you from them. That is talking about being stretched so tight that you feel like you're going to snap. Not only this, but the Pharisees and the Sadducees rule the temple that Zechariah works in, and they are absolutely at this point corrupt. So much so, they killed the Son of God out of jealousy. Not only that, but Herod is a terrible king. Herod one time is recorded to have been laying on his deathbed, and everyone thought he died, so his son named himself the new king. He heard the trumpets, woke up from the sleep he was in, and wondered why they were celebrating, and they said, your son has made himself king, so he had his son murdered. That's who Zechariah and Elizabeth were under. Well, God was like, man, hope is here. Hope is here. So on one hand, there is a sense of expectation. You're like waiting for God to do something wonderful. The deliverer is coming. John is coming, and then he's going to usher in the way of Jesus, and Jesus is going to deliver us. And on the other sense, there is absolutely this, and I feel so stretched that I don't know if I can get through this, but I hope that he will let me and help me and deliver me. Now that's two parts of the word for hope. And the third one was not introduced until the New Testament. And it was the hope that the angels were actually talking about. The third use of the word hope is the word elpis. Elpis. And it means something entirely different. It means living hope. And what it means is that, hey, Zechariah, hey, Elizabeth, hey, early church leaders, hey, apostles, God may not deliver you in the way that you expect that he will deliver you, but ultimately, in the end, he will. It is this hope that would cause James, the brother of Jesus, to be thrown off a temple and die. It is the hope that would cause Thomas, the one we call the doubter, to be martyred for Christ. It is the hope for Peter to be most likely crucified upside down and for Paul to be beheaded. It is the hope that says whether or not God delivers me from being beheaded, he will deliver me in the end. Because I have hope and you have hope and we have hope that our God is a living God. And he came to deliver us whether in the present moment or not. So that our hope is that whether or not God sees fit to bless us with the blessings that we're hoping for, he will bless us with greater blessings in eternity. Whether or not we are delivered from the things we ask to be delivered from, we are ultimately delivered from them when we stand in the presence of the one who came to redeem us and give us living hope. Real hope. Hope that says, I hope you'll bless me. And I'm in this really tragic situation, and I hope you will deliver me. But even if you don't bless me and you don't deliver me, you will ultimately show me how good you are in this life or in the next. And this is what Jesus came to do. He came to usher in an entirely new definition of hope. Hope that is living. Hope that cannot be taken away. No matter how tight the cord is, we have hope because we have a king who came and he died and he rose again. So what we have to do with hope is we cannot think of hope as a feeling or an emotion. Their idea of hope was something quite a bit different. Their idea of hope was more like a coat that you choose to put on. The idea is much more like, rather than I just feel good right now, so I have hope, it's like, you know what? I'm leaving here and I'm going to put hope on. I'm going to choose that even in the midst of my anxiety and in the midst of my depression and in the midst of my sickness and in the midst of my problem and in the midst of this and the midst of that and in the midst of that, I'm just going to go ahead and choose to put hope on, and I'm going to choose for hope. So I brought a coat today. Sometimes in life, you have to choose to wait with hopeful expectations. Sometimes it looks like there's no solution, and you just have to make the choice to say, whether I can see it or not, I'm going to choose to wait for him. Rather than try to solve my problems on my own and rush into a worse situation, I'm going to choose to wait and trust that he will bless me. But sometimes hope might be more like this, where we have to say, you know what? I choose right now, even though I feel so stretched and so tight, I just choose to trust that he will deliver me because he says he will. So I'm going to make that choice. And then sometimes, my wife bought me these fancy gloves, and I'm still trying to figure out how to put them on. Sometimes we say, you know what? I hope he's going to bless me. I really, really hope he's going to deliver me. I hope I stop dropping this mic. I'm not very good at this. But I also know, and I choose to put on, that even if I'm not delivered, I will be delivered in heaven with him. And I got to make a choice to put on these different types of hope all the time. It takes wisdom to say, sometimes I'm just going to hope for good things. And sometimes I'm going to hope that bad things stop happening. And sometimes I'm going to hope that I'll see my family again. So yesterday, worship team, you guys can come up here. We're almost done. Yesterday, I was cleaning some buildings, and there's this country song by a guy named Jamie Johnson, and it's this song called In Color. And it's an older song, and it's like, you ever hear a song and you're like, did this guy write this about my life? Like, was he there when I... It's a song about a guy sitting down with his grandpa who's showing him black and white photos of the Great Depression and World War II and then his marriage. And I literally have all three pictures of my grandpa, and they're all in black and white. And I've literally had the same exact conversations he had with the songs. And I just remember thinking about Christmas. And I remember the Christmas my grandfather died. And I remember driving entirely too fast from Chicago, Illinois, as fast as I could go, just praying, God, don't let a policeman see me. I don't know if that's a biblical prayer or not, but I was praying it. And I was going well over a speed limit, and also praying that God would somehow keep my grandfather alive long enough for me to go see him one more time. And when I got home, he'd passed away. And I remember just being like so mad, just so frustrated. And that where I grew up, it's a little bit different. You can't bury someone in the winter there because the ground's too frozen. So we did a funeral for him at Christmas, which is like the worst time. And then in the spring, when the ground thawed, we had a burial service. So it was like there was no closure until the spring, and then we went through it all over again. I just remember like being so frustrated with like, I put all my faith in you and you just couldn't keep him alive for 8 hours? It's just like feeling that very honestly, feeling this very real frustration of also, I'm at a Bible college and they told me I couldn't go see him. And these are the people I trust spiritually. I was so mad, so frustrated. And you know that I found his photo album that he saved for me like the next week. And in it, he had given me his dog tags. And I showed him to my mom, and mom was like, I never even knew he still had those. And I found out my grandpa had chosen to never tell anybody any stories about World War II except for me. And I just began to get this different sense of hope, where I said, okay, he didn't keep him until I got home. My grandfather passed away singing Silent Night with my brother, who was oddly playing a trumpet, which had to be the least silent night and the least peaceful way to go possible. And my grandfather gave me very specific memories. And I remember thinking, okay, it didn't go the way I wanted it to go. But someday, I will see him again because we have Christmas. So what better season to lose someone you love than in the season where you are reminded that you will see them again for eternity, and you will be with them for eternity. And there are times where we just have to say, I'm going to put hope on like a coat. I don't feel it. I don't want to. I'm frustrated, and I don't even want to think about having hope. I'm discouraged to the point where I just am like, I don't want to think about any good outcomes. I'm going to put hope on. I'm going to protect myself from the cold. I'm going to protect my head from the cold and my hands so that I can still do good even in hard times, because hope is a choice. See, we hope in Jesus because of what he's done. We hope in Jesus because of what he's doing. We ultimately hope in him because of who he is. And then we hope in him because of what he will do someday. And this is the true definition of hope. It's not blind optimism. It is reality might make it seem like it's not going to happen. But I have a God who defies reality, who bends reality to his will. I have a God who makes things so different just by entering the conversation. And Zechariah and Elizabeth are changed forever. And we look at them today and we realize that God remembers his promises. It's no mistake that in the middle of 400 years of silence, God calls a man named God Remembers to marry a girl named God's Promises. And today we know that if he promises it, it will come to pass because of the first Silent Night. So let's stand to our feet today. I don't know which of the three types of hope you need to put on. Maybe it's just hopeful expectation of like, man, God's going to do something this year. And it's going to be awesome. And I cannot wait for him to do it. That's the type of hope I'm putting on this year. That's the type of hope that I'm telling myself, I cannot wait to see what God does. Maybe you need to put on a different type of hope. It's like, I feel so stretched right now that I feel like I'm going to snap. I am that cord. I feel like Zechariah and Elizabeth felt, like I'm stretched. But he's in with me in the middle of all of that tension. Maybe it's the third one. Hey, this didn't go the way I hoped it would. But it will someday. Because that's who he is. And that's what he promises. Whichever one of these hopes you need to put on, I'm going to encourage you to put it on today. To make a mental choice to put on hope. Maybe you need to today just find a moment to be silent just shut off Nat King Cole and Andy Williams, shut off football. Maybe today's the day to not go to the mall for a minute and just ask God, which hope are you asking me to put on? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, you are good, you're loving, you're just, you're kind.